Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The What, When, Why, and How of Unobtrusive Observation. My name is Jennifer Audette. I am the Director of Marketing at L&E Research. Our guest speakers today are Abbe Macbeth and Jason Rogers. Abbe is the Regional Sales Manager for Noldus Information Technology. She has a bachelor's degree in cognitive science, a master's degree in psychology, and a PhD in behavioral neuroscience. Abbe also has extensive experience and expertise in behavioral research. Jason is a senior consultant and the Midwest accounts manager at Noldus. Jason has a doctorate in psychology, and prior to his current role at Noldus, has worked with Nielsen Consumer Neuroscience as a consultant and with Brand Trust as the science officer, as well as holding other positions at Noldus. We are excited to have Abbe and Jason with us today to share their expertise and some stories that I'm sure will be interesting from past research that they have conducted. Abbe and Jason, thank you guys so much for being here today.
Thank you, Jennifer, for having us, and thank you to everyone for logging in.
Yes, thank you. We're excited to speak with everyone.
If you have questions, you can submit them through the webinar, and we will address them at the end. The overview of what we're going to talk about today is, first we want to start with the goals and then briefly discuss the traditional ethnography, and then move into a little bit of how we do things and this concept of the unobtrusive observation. Focus on the nuts and bolts of it. How do you actually do it in the home? How is this accomplished in the field? And then once you have that, making meaning of it. How do we put that together and form some sort of meaningful conclusion? Now, the goal is to end in about 40 minutes, so hopefully we'll have some time for questions. So the goal of this webinar is to build on the traditional ethnography, and that if you have one takeaway from all of this is that we don't want to say quantitative versus qualitative. We want to talk about and. We want to talk about the combination of quantity and quality. So we want to layer on to the ethnography and add a true understanding of the consumer behavior by going over the overview of how we actually do this in a consumer environment. Talk about the research logistics. What do we mean by recording? What do we mean by observing? How do we do the actual coding, and what does all this mean? And then give some illustrations with some of the stories and examples that we've seen from our own research. And again, focusing not on the native part of it, but talking about the quality and quantity of data.
And as you'll see as we're going through, there are a lot of logistics to consider when you want to actually observe people in either their home or in a field environment. But these are logistics that can be gotten past, and once you've gotten past them and figured out how to take care of them, it really does add a lot to other methodologies.
The traditional ethnography really came about in anthropology, where the idea was to go to a culture and immerse yourself within that. That evolved into market research, where the traditional model is you want to immerse yourself in the consumer's environment and go there, see their experiences, talk with them about it, have them show you, have them walk you through it, and really get a deep understanding of that experience. Of course, for those of you who do it, you know all of this, but it requires a skilled interviewer to conduct the research, usually on site of the respondent's home. There are lots of advantages to this. Obviously, you can get away with smaller numbers as opposed to more survey or something like this. You can get away with 10, 20, 30 respondents. And you do get to some really powerful, rich insights. But one small advantage of this is how well do people really know themselves? And so we joke about this, like when you know your mom's coming, of course you're going to vacuum the house. When you know someone is coming, you're going to clean up the house. And of course you're going to make yourself look presentable. in 1958, Hawthorne Works company in Cicero, Illinois wanted to look at the effects of lighting on their company. And what they found is that the lighting did not matter whatsoever. The fact that people were being observed actually changed their behavior. This was later termed the Hawthorne effect by Henry Landsberger, but it illustrates the fact that much like particle physics, when being observed, people's behaviors do in fact change. And of course, the ethnographer's goal is to get beyond that, to get to the deep insight. But if you're interested in certain types of behaviors, then you can go beyond the traditional ethnography, and you need something more to that. The same holds true for surveys and for focus groups. You can get a lot of data. They're getting at broad issues. You can really get to the personal stories and really get to some of the deep meanings underneath.
However, there are cons with these, as with any technique. But when you're doing something like a survey or a focus group or an interview, the biggest issue is that you're still asking someone to tell you what they think, to tell you what's going on when they're making a buying decision, for example. And a lot of these decisions that people make are not necessarily conscious decisions. It's an unconscious process that they're making, and you're asking them in a very conscious way. So it's not necessarily the best way to get at why someone makes a choice they do. Why does someone use a product in the manner in which they use it?
Now, I found this joke. This is a perfect illustration from this Dilbert comic of the types of conversations that those of us who are labeled more quantitative have with those of you who are described as more qualitative, jokes we have even within our own office, where terms like, oh, this campaign was a huge success, but how many messages do you get, right? What were the numbers behind it? Can you actually show what the sales increase was? And you get to the point, well, who invited the numbers guy, right? And so you get this back and forth to illustrate that what we do is typically labeled as quantitative, but there's meaning to both of these things.
And again, that they don't have to be in opposition to one another, but they can work really well hand in hand, and that's what we're going to continue to show.
Now, what we call unobtrusive observation, basically it's like Orwell's Big Brother. So advancements in camera technology, the digital camera revolution, have made it easier to record people in their natural environments on the go. I read a report that there were as many pictures taken in a single day as there were taken all in the last century. Obviously, everyone has access to a camera. I'm staring at 3 of them right now with webcams, with cell phones, etc. And so this is what we really mean. This is what we build on, that we're measuring consumer behavior by recording it, allowing the respondent to act as natural as possible. We're recording for longer periods of time. We'll talk more about that, what that means, but days, weeks, etc., so we can really get at the routine. Then we score, we annotate, we segment that data based on predefined predictions of the research questions. And then we analyze that using the way that we know as behaviorists how to analyze data, to look at the number of times it occurs, how long it occurs, the sequence of events. The idea, all of it, is that this is to reduce subjectivity, to make the research more objective, but still get to the insights.
Now, just like with other methodologies that we mentioned before, surveys, interviews, etc., there's pros and cons. So the nice thing with measuring behavior directly and observing people is you can get very in-depth because you're deciding what segments, what behavioral codes you're interested in. So you can get as detailed as you want because you're because we are coding things from video, we can go back and rescore, so you've got a lot of flexibility there. You can note a lot of activities because you're not doing it live, so you're not worrying about missing things. There's not much bias because we have trained coders who are blind to what's going on, and you can then easily analyze a lot of data. The biggest negative to this is that it can be very costly and it can take a lot of time. So the more things that you want to score, the more things that you're interested in coding, the longer that's going to take. Same thing, the more respondents you add, even in an ethnography, the longer that's going to take. And you get a lot of data, so you need to be able to pull meaning out and make use of all that data that you spent time and money collecting. So these are just some considerations to take, or some things to take into consideration.
Now, when we talk about actually doing this, there are three topics that we're going to discuss. First is privacy of the respondent. How are we going to record the respondent? How long do we need to record? And then how do we actually do it? What videos do we choose? How do we want to go about this and think about this in a logistic sort of way? And when we at Noldus sit down with a client, these are the first types of questions that we are going to ask. First is, how do we want to make sure we're recording just our respondent and no one else? So if there are children in the house, how do we make sure that we're capturing exactly the person that we need, right? For example, we could do this by making it motion censored. We could have the respondent trigger it. These are some logistics to work out. Likewise, if you're recording in a sensitive area, right? If you're recording in, say, a bathroom, you don't want everything that happens in the bathroom. Or perhaps you don't want when the children are in the house. You just want to look at the buying behavior of just our female respondent. Now, these issues are easily dealt with. They're easily controlled, but we have to ask them up front. Likewise, we have literally thousands of hours of video that I wish we could show you to illustrate our points, but because of confidentiality issues, both with the respondents and the clients, we can't really show these to you. So when working with, say, for example, L&E for your recruit, the first question you have to ask is, what do you want to do with this video? Do you want to be able to show this to your internal stakeholders? Do you want to be able to use this externally? How can you ensure your patient's privacy and confidentiality? Again, these are things that are easily dealt with, but things to think about up front.
Another thing to think about is issues of how long do you need to record, right? Because the type of study that you're doing is going to change the length of time that you need to gather data. If you're interested in someone's daily beauty routine, for example, that routine is going to be different on a weekday versus a weekend. So you're going to need to capture data across both of those time periods. If you're interested in how someone does their laundry at home, people don't necessarily do their laundry every day. Those of us with small children do, but not everyone does. So you might need to record for a couple of weeks in order to get a good sample size of what happens. If you're interested in toothbrushing behavior, 3 days might be sufficient, assuming people are brushing their teeth twice a day as they should. So these are, questions that need to come up and that need to be discussed ahead of time. So not only can you get your logistics straight, but you can also let your respondents know how much time you're going to be recording them.
Likewise, we also need a couple of days at the beginning to acclimate to recording, right? That's typically the first question. How do you know that you're getting people acting naturally? Well, let me give you an example. So we were doing a project where we were looking at people's routines in the morning and the evening. And this recording was done over a 10-day period. We'll tell you more about this towards the end. But at one point of the video, our respondent is on the phone talking with a friend. And this respondent is talking about how this person was shorted on a drug deal, and how if this drug dealer doesn't stop shorting this person, then that person is going to have to find a new drug dealer. Now, obviously, if she were aware of the fact that she was being recorded, maybe she would not have said this. So it just shows that people do get used to it. They do ignore the fact that it's there. Anyone who has seen the show Big Brother, as much acting as they're doing, they do relax. But you do need that couple of day period initially to get them used to it. Okay, so those logistics aside, the next we want to talk about is how you actually want to do it, right? What are the sort of nuts and bolts of what kind of cameras you have? And we put a couple of examples on here. Obviously, there are lots of examples, but just categorically, the ways you can go about it. The first type of camera that you can see in the upper right-hand corner is called a Muvi, M-U-V-I. They're wonderful cameras. You can attach a suction cup and put it on a mirror. You can take it with you in a car. It records to HD. It's fantastic. And it records all to a local SD card. So you can have it triggered by the respondent. You can have it triggered externally. They're inexpensive to use. They're quite wonderful to use. One of the main limitations, of course, is if you're recording for a week continuously, the SD card is going to fill up. There's only so much space that you have, and so that's a thing to consider. When the video is coming in, what are you doing with that video? Is it being recorded to the camera? And if so, how do you ensure it's being recorded properly? And then how do you retrieve that? What do you do with it once you have it? Noldus typically uses a company called Axis. You see these in the bottom right-hand corner. They're used with our own proprietary software, but basically these cameras run on a local network that records to a laptop. So that means that we have to have a laptop installed somewhere in the home, hardwired to these cameras. You can remote log in to make sure that you're still recording. You can set times to record. You can have them motion censored, etc., all of these things. And there are a lot of other cameras. I know other firms like Ipsos uses cameras that you can remote log in. Obviously, cameras like security cameras work very well. You could even use webcam, like you see the Microsoft webcam. All of these things allow you to record, but they're just questions for how long are you recording, what are you doing with that video recording, where is that recording being stored, and how are you retrieving it afterwards?
And then the next question comes up of, do you need audio? Is this something where what's happening in the video, you actually need to hear what's going on, or is simply watching the behavior sufficient? If you need audio, do the cameras that you've chosen have microphones inside of them so that you can get audio and video in one stream? Are they video only and you need to have external microphones? If so, where are you going to need to place those so that you can get the audio you need? This is something that we at Noldus have a lot of experience doing in many different environments, and so these are questions that we know to ask before we start working with any client.
And the picture, if any of you have ever seen the Kentucky Fried movie, that's what this picture refers to. If you haven't seen that movie, I highly recommend you checking it out. But again, key question to ask yourself, where am I recording? How long am I recording? And how do I want to initiate the start and the stop of that recording? Right? Obviously, if the respondent is triggering the camera, then the respondent is making a conscious acknowledgement that they are being recorded. Sometimes that can't be helped, but just things to consider.
So now let's show you an example of what we did in this arena, where we were using only video, but to actually look at how a CPG company came to us and was interested in looking at how someone actually uses an appliance in their own home on a daily basis. So of course you have the option of giving someone a survey, right? So you can come to them and say, we know that you said you use our refrigerators. Can you fill in the survey and answer these questions about how many times a day do you go into your refrigerator? How often do you use these different compartments? And you can get some data from that. But we also know, I know for myself, if you ask me how many times did I open my refrigerator in a day, I don't think I could tell you that. So these are things that, again, happen unconsciously, and we don't really think about them. So another option, which is the option we were hired to do, was to actually go in and observe behavior in the home as people interact.
You could also do this with a traditional ethnography and have a moderator come to the house and say, show me your food prep for this week and let's go over how you're going to do it. Right? But for example, if you're there on a Wednesday, maybe you miss Taco Tuesday. Or if you're like our house, every week is a different week. And so you're not going to be able to truly get at the full scope of this type of behavior from a one-day snapshot or from just a simple survey snapshot. In this case, we were able to look at who was using where, what part, what compartment, how they were actually standing, what type of interaction, what they were pulling out, how many times, all of the details that we were looking at. And we were looking at 3 markets, and what we actually found that is really no surprise is that dinner time means different things to different cultures, but what is really interesting is the way in which these cultures need to go to the refrigerator. So of course, Americans need space for condiments, for drinks, for frozens, whereas in India they needed space for fresh ingredients, for the daily meals. They were going to the fridge a lot more than their other counterparts. Something else that came out of was this idea of the egg tray. No one's buying eggs. No one's putting them in the egg tray anymore. And so that space needed to be repurposed. So what also came out of that is the idea of when you need to control things like power usage and humidity, you need a refrigerator door that can accommodate that, especially on a shaky power grid where brownouts are common. You want to use the least amount of energy as possible. And if you look at refrigerators today on the market, you can see how this research influenced some of that by creating products that allow for more organization on the shelves, more humidity control, more ability to get into a small part of the fridge without needing to get to all of the fridge. And again, maybe this could have come out of an ethnography, but you really could not have done this in a test facility or a survey. The only way we could have really gotten at this level of insight was truly by looking at what they were doing. So we've looked at some examples and talked a little logistics on how to record in the home. Now if we switch, now we want to look at how do we look at products in the field or on the go. How are people actually using products? This is where technology has really advanced over the last 10 years, and I'm sure everyone who is listening has either used or heard of a GoPro. If not, I encourage you to look it up on YouTube. There are some really amazing videos of snowboarders, of base jumpers, etc. But these cameras allow you to attach them to helmets, attach them to anything, along with also the camera you see in the woman's hand called Get Narrative. These are very small cameras that allow you to record on the go from virtually anywhere.
So as you can imagine, an advantage to that is that you could have someone even start in their home and then record what they're doing throughout the day and all the different ways in which they interact with the product in their daily life. It gives you a lot of freedom.
In addition to that, you can see a picture there. Our research partners at both Tobii Pro and SMI have improved their wearable technology. So now you can actually even do eye tracking in a mobile environment, in a shopper study, for example, and get heat maps of what they're actually looking at. You can record the scene from the bridge for doing an in-store study. And as you can see in the lower left-hand corner, Noldus did a study using GoPros and external cameras to look at the emotional journey of how men and women used shaving products. So what we did is we recruited people to a hotel room. We allowed them to, in the privacy of their own confines, to shave their necks for men or their legs for ladies. And the goal was to look at the emotional and functional journey of different stages of razor use.
So what we did during this study was, in addition to having the camera on both what was going on as well as the camera trained on the face so that we could analyze for facial emotional content as well during actual product usage, we also gave the respondent surveys at the end to say, on this list of questions, tell us which razor you liked better, the premium versus the generic, essentially, or the non-premium razor. And most people rated higher with the premium razor, as was to be expected. But what we found from looking at behaviors and the emotions expressed during shaving that did not come out from the interview was that a couple of women in particular cut themselves while they were shaving and expressed anger on their faces in those moments. That did not come out during the survey. So by the time they had reached the end of it, this wasn't information that carried over. But we saw that when they were using the razor in a particular way, it caused a cut, which caused them to feel anger towards that product. And that's something that was in addition to doing this with survey.
Another example is from a hand washing study that was conducted in India. I've never been to India, but anyone who has been can tell you that cleanliness is an issue. So what we did is we installed cameras, motion censored, so not to record the entire activities in the bathroom, but just in front of the sink, and record it for 1 week. The idea was to look at, are people washing their hands? How are they washing their hands? How much water are they using? And what we found is that how people wash their hands and the type of cleanser they needed was not at all what was being created for them. For example, they needed a cleanser that did not use a lot of water. So this led to some insights as to what type of product is needed, how respondents are actually using the product, and how you can create messaging to target the use of that product. So again, you can see some examples of how we can put in cameras in a home environment or in a field environment.
Now, what if you wanted to create a research facility that had this kind of ability all the time, but you still wanted people to be able to act naturally? And that leads to a project that we were involved in, a facility in the Netherlands, some of you may have heard of, called the Restaurant of the Future.
So this is a collaborative effort by the University of Wageningen with Noldus and several other companies there. This is a quote-unquote living laboratory for the study of food choice and consumer experience. It is a multifunctional research facility. It is a huge cafe that can seat 200 people. It also has test kitchens, a sensory lab, mood rooms. It's fitted with 45 cameras and over 3 kilometers, which translates to about 1.5 miles of cabling. The whole point of all of this is to be able to look at how people consume their lunches or their products, selection of foods, etc. So you can manipulate environmental and social conditions without directly interfering with the respondent's ability to eat and act natural. So if you put more chairs in, are they likely to sit more in social environments with strangers? If you move the location of the soups, does that change the behavior of buying the soups? So you can still do an unobtrusive study with manipulations.
So let's talk about an example there. We were contacted by, there's a food sciences company that we worked with who was interested in knowing, does how you present food at the salad bar and through the buffet, does it affect selection and buying behavior? So if you presented people with 3 different chicken sandwiches labeled new, lower price, healthy, In actuality, they were all the same sandwich. Only thing that was different was the label. And what we found was that men preferred those that were labeled new, whereas women preferred those that were labeled healthy. Price actually was not an issue in this selection. So again, you could have surveyed people and asked them, but 30 minutes after buying their food and eating it, are they going to remember which one they grabbed? Maybe, maybe not. By observing the actual behaviors, we're able to really see how making these small manipulations changes buying behavior.
Another example is within the restaurant of the future, you can also change the light, the odor, the temperature. We know that the sounds being played in a restaurant change the pace at which you eat. And so these are all things that are easily manipulated. And one really great example that I really like is this idea called nudging. So let's say I leave here at facilities in Raleigh, and we go out to lunch at Relish down the street, and when we walk in, they have a couple of samples, right, like you see at Sam's Club or at Costco. And if you ask the question, does offering a sample, a healthy sample or a non-healthy sample, does that change someone's purchase behavior? So if they come into the restaurant of the future, they are offered a piece of chocolate versus, say, a carrot. Does that change the way in which they work? Can you nudge them towards a purchase? And what this publication found is that it did not actually change their lunch selection, but it led to a larger intake of food. So they actually ate more. So in a sense, it just primed their appetite. So these are things to ask yourself. If you offer a free sample, is it really having the effect that you would want? And is that translating to more buying behavior? Right? And again, things that you can do in an environment where you can still observe behavior and still offer some manipulations. Okay, the last example we want to go, we got about 10 minutes. The last example we want to show is doing shop-alongs. Now, I myself could do another 4-hour seminar on shop-alongs because I am utterly obsessed with this. But with our research partners at Toby and SMI, you now have the ability to do eye tracking in store. You can combine this with tracking analytics. So for example, we could fit somebody with a tracking beacon either on their person or even on their shopping cart, and instead of following them around, we can just let them shop naturally. And you can see some examples here of some of the tracking that we've done in a grocery store. You can look at heat maps and all of this stuff. So even using cameras, there are advancements in tracking and eye tracking that allow you to even get to shop-alongs, shopper studies, where you don't need to necessarily, quote-unquote, observe them, but you can still allow them to act naturally and be in their natural environment.
So we have, as Jason said, we've got about 10 minutes or so remaining. So we want to really get down to now, we've talked about all of the ways in which to gather data. And once you have all of that data and you've got to that point, how do you actually make meaning from it? You've spent the time and the money, and now you want to really be able to pull out meaning that's going to answer your research questions. We at Noldus talk a lot about coding. We mentioned this a little bit at the beginning. What do we mean when we talk about coding? We don't mean writing code or doing any programming. We have our software that we use. But what we mean by coding is to segment your observation using a systematic schema that we help you to create. It's all based on the research questions, and it allows you to categorize behavior so you can annotate what you observe in a really systematic, objective way. And then we can also measure reliability to make sure that everything is consistent throughout the coding team, so that you know that when you say that you are observing a specific behavior, it actually is that behavior. And you can define these schemes prior to coding the video, so you know what your research questions are ahead of time. You can also define them during or even after you're watching your videos.
So if we do this at the beginning, we call this a priori coding. This is the way that we at Noldus do it, and most quote-unquote quant are going to do it. So the research questions are defined prior to coding, and in some cases prior even to recording the video. This is where us as behavioral experts will rely on you as category experts to work together to define what are the research questions and how are we coding to make sure that we answer those research questions. Once we have those, coding is done by people who are trained in how to observe behavior, but who have no idea what the research questions are. They are, as we say in psychology, quote unquote, blind to the condition. So they're not looking for, to answer the research questions, they're looking to just code data. Now, one disadvantage is that this can be time consuming. It doesn't always have to be. We've done a study recently where we did a very quick turnaround time. But as noted, just something to keep in mind that the more complex the coding scheme is, the more expensive it is going to be. Now, in traditional qualitative ethnography, another way to code it is what we call post hoc, or afterwards. This is closely related to what some would call a grounded theory, for example, where it is the opposite of a reductionist philosophy. You require no category knowledge. Themes are identified during the research or by watching the videos. Codes are then emergent concepts based on those videos. Then you go back and code the videos according to those themes or those written transcripts. In most cases, most of the software used for this is to analyze transcripts. So of course, just like with our coding time, in this case, the disadvantage or the time is the accuracy and the time to do that transcription. And again, there's no right and wrong. The idea is that coding is either done and set up beforehand or set up to do afterwards.
And which method you're going to use can be discussed and figured out ahead of time so that everyone is aware and on the same path. And it's going to depend in part on what your research questions are.
Now, in the interest of full disclosure and time, we wanted to include this just so you knew some examples. Obviously, we at Noldus use our own Observer XT, but there are lots of ways to do this for coding videos, be studio code, other options that you can get freeware. If you're looking for any text analytics or for written transcripts, there are great programs like Atlas TI or NVivo. There are lots more, but I wanted to put this up. We wanted to have this so more as a resource for you. If this is something that you have a question for, ping us afterwards and we'll happily tell you more about this. Okay, so let's actually try to get some meaning out of this, right? And so obviously qualitative research is to understand the underlying reasons, the opinions, the motivations, the journey, the experience of what happened. Whereas on the quant side is to get the numbers, right? How long did they do it? How much time did they take? How many times did it happen? What was the sequence in which things occurred? And the goal of research is to blend these things together, right? Like a perfect mixed drink, we want to have both sides mixed to create the deepest meaning possible. So for example, we did a project looking at how people use products in their home. A traditional ethnography was done, and then we recorded some video for 10 days where we recorded the behavior of what was occurring according to the research question of the client. And when we went back and looked at the comparison of the ethnography to what their actual routine was, there were some really interesting discrepancies. So for example, when asked what the routine was, the respondents were accurate in describing their routine. So this is what I do in the morning, this is what I do in the evening, but they're general. What we found from actually coding the data was that it was a lot more nuanced than how they were describing it. When we ran all of the analyses and did all of the statistics, we found that people are extremely accurate in describing their routine, but it only accounted for about 40–50% of what actually happened. So the traditional ethnography was accurate at getting the routine, but missed half of what was really going on. So this led to some really interesting things about the awareness of their own routine, gaps that may be occurring, opportunity areas for products. Maybe they say we're using products A, B, and C, but what they didn't tell you is they're actually combining products A, B, and C. And you didn't know that unless you actually watched it.
In another recent example, we worked in conjunction with a pharmaceutical company that was interested in looking at a particular disease and how patients who live with this disease are actually affected by it on a daily basis in order to better help the healthcare team to help these patients. And a traditional ethnography was done, and that looked into and gave us some key insights in generalities about how do these people live with this disease on a daily basis. We then went in and coded and actually looked at and found new ways of understanding these patients. So for example, when we looked at the number of times during the ethnography they actually mentioned their own disease versus other diseases. When you look at the amount of time that they spend, even when prompted by the ethnographer to talk about the disease, they actually just want to talk about their past. They don't want to talk about the disease. And the ethnography gets you to those underlying reasons, and then we can come in and add that additional bit of quantitative data to really show that you have to really push these people to want to talk about what's going on with them currently. Unfortunately, in both these cases, our NDAs kind of prevent us from being able to go into too much detail, as I'm sure you understand. But what we really just want to impress with this is that you can marry these two methods. One is not at the opposite to the other. It's quantitative and qualitative to really look at deeper insights and to get at what's really going on with your consumer or your respondent or even your patient.
And as we discussed, there are lots of options for recording. There are lots of questions to ask before doing this. It can be done in the field. It can be done in the home. All of these things are all available to you. And what we're really talking about is a balancing act of marrying the quantitative, the qualitative with time and the available resources. So instead of thinking about them on as diametrically opposed quantitative, qualitative, or as opposing circles or Venn diagram, I want you to think about it more like a yin-yang, right? Where we want to get to that little bit of qual inside the quant, or the little bit of quant inside the qual, and create that balance so that we can truly understand the consumer journey, what the consumers are doing, and get a full rounded picture of our respondents.
We want to thank you all. That comes to the end of our talk. I think we stayed in just about the time that we wanted. And now, as Jason mentioned at the beginning, you can submit questions through the webinar, and Jennifer will relay those to us so we can answer them. We're also happy, here's our contact information. Feel free to send us emails, anything you wish to talk about afterwards, and we're always happy to speak with you.
Great. Thank you guys so much. That was great information, as always. We did get a few questions that came in while you were speaking. I'll start with the first one. With the Hawthorne effect, how do you include the potential biases? Interviewer bias is typically overcome with methods like online research, removing the researcher from the equation.
So Jennifer, from what it sounded like, there were lots of 3 or 4 questions in there. So
yeah, a few.
The Hawthorne effect is basically psychology's anecdotal evidence to say that people's behaviors change when they know they're being observed. Now, let's see, the second part of your question was removing experimenter bias. That's kind of the whole goal of what we're talking about. And when you say this is done online, of course, yes, very much so.
And we didn't talk about it here, but we have online methodologies that we use as well, where you can gather data from respondents through surveys around the world. So we know the advantages to going with those methods as well.
But the thing to ask yourself is, if you're interested in studying a System 1 process, right, an automatic, unconscious System 1 process, and you're using a System 2 means like an online survey to do that, are you really getting there? Are you really getting to those insights. So yes, there are lots of means to do that, to remove that experimenter bias, and that is absolutely the goal of what we're trying to do.
Great. The next question, in the fridge opening example, was the number of people in the household a factor? They're asking if it's possible that in India, because there are more people in the household, that leads to more openings.
No, it was not the nuclear unit. It wasn't the family size. It was, in fact, the meal prep itself and the way that they went about creating the meal. That is an excellent question. Cultural differences in family size and house size is a very big factor, but something that was controlled for.
Great. Another question. Can you tell me more when you reference traditional qualitative ethnography? Do you mean when a qual moderator leads in context without video and post-video analysis?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Can you speak at all to the incidence rate regarding people who are willing to allow in-home video observation and or, you guys probably don't know this, but you may, and or incentive amounts needed per day for that sort of thing?
To be honest with you, this is where we rely on the expertise of L&E.
Yep. Yeah, and I can say that, you know, it's obviously more difficult to recruit for in-home observation. We have certainly done it. In fact, I know in the past we have done an in-home with people shaving their legs and taking video of that. So it is more difficult, and usually the incentives are higher. I don't know off the top of my head what those are, but it's certainly possible. Next question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think you can speak to this as well, but I know from some of the work we have done where we did not do the recruit of participants, but I saw how much they were given. When you have a specialized population, for example, when you're looking for patients with a specific disease, the incentives are higher because you know that you have a smaller group to recruit from, and so it's going to cost a little more to get those people to agree to a 6-hour interview, for example.
Right, right. Another question. How many people do you use for a coding team to do all the post work, such as filtering through the video to find the times of interest and code the behaviors, etc.?
That is another excellent question. Our coding team is anywhere from 3 to 10 people, depending on the project size. This is, again, where this idea of reliability is very important to make sure that all coders are coding equally. In the academic world, coding teams usually are comprised of poorly paid undergraduates or graduate students. We have a highly trained coding team that we work with to do this.
Great. Have you utilized this technology for mystery shopping so that the mystery shopper is recording the observation? And if so, are there privacy or permission concerns with salespeople not knowing they're being recorded?
So we have not worked with any company doing mystery shopping yet. It's something that we both would like to do. I know that some companies can get away with this. For example, we forgot to mention at the Restaurant of the Future, there's a sign on the building when you walk in that says, at any point, research experiments may be undergoing. I acknowledge by entering this facility that I may be video recorded and my data may be used. So sometimes you can get away with having something like that present, so all employees may know they may show up on video if this kind of thing is going on. It's going to be very company and store specific potentially. So it's something that we can help our client look into, but that's something that we have to figure out for each example.
Great. How do you share the video with the client? Do you have a platform that is searchable by code or key phrase? And can you make highlight reels with clips?
Yes, to both of those. Those are excellent questions. Our suite allows us to create a searchable database and also have the ability to create video segments based on those categories of interest.
Great. Do you recruit regular or typical users, or do you go for super users or heavy users so that you are more likely to see interesting behavior?
That really depends on the research question, whether you want true loyalists or just part-time users. It really truly depends. And this is where a partnership with L&E to recruit is really important.
And when we start off at the beginning of working with someone or with you, we would be able to address that and to say, you know, what are you looking for? Do you want to assess both types of people? Do you want to assess just super users? And then we can help to gather that data depending. So we're not going to make that call for you as the researcher. We're just going to help you get to those people.
Okay. And I think we have time. I'm going to give you one last question here. Are there cultures or regions where doing video in the home is taboo? Thinking specifically about China, the Chinese consumers, if they are open to this, and if the government even allows it. I'm not sure if you guys know specifically for China.
Not necessarily in the home per se. I know that there have been some logistics of getting the recording equipment into the actual countries. And in some environments like, for example, Mexico, the equipment goes to the country but never returns. And so working to get the, I forget the word for it, but it's working to making sure that the researchers can get into the country and have permits to work in that country and the equipment can get into that country. That is the biggest hurdle that we've seen, then the recording of the people themselves.
Okay. Actually, I have one more question here for you guys. In the shaving ethnography, were you concerned about introducing respondents to a different environment than where they typically shave their legs or face? Meaning that the mirror placement could be different from the home or the tub height. And yeah, would that skew the data?
It's definitely a concern, and that was one of the factors in starting this study was, do we want to try to go into the home? In this case, it was decided mutually between Noldus and the client for a lot of logistical reasons to go with the hotel. Client respondents seemed more comfortable with that. That was part of it, but also just for some other logistical reasons that we can't really get into. It was decided to go with the hotel. We did that knowing that the exact question you brought up is a potential factor, that people are not necessarily going to shave in the same way that they do when they're in their home with all of their own equipment, their own shaving cream, etc. And so sometimes those considerations, it's just something you have to deal with in order to get data that you need.
Okay. Well, I think we're just about out of time. I want to let everybody know that we did record today's webinar, and for everybody who's registered, we will send out a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slide deck and Jason and Abby's contact information. If you have a question that didn't get answered, you can either email those to events@leresearch.com, or again, you'll get Abby and Jason's contact info. You're welcome to contact them directly. Thank you guys so much for presenting, and thank everybody for joining.
Yeah, thank you for attending, and thank you, Jennifer and Eleni, for hosting this for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.